Thank you, Hans. I have to start off by saying I'm at Michigan State, and they would be very offended that you said the University of Michigan, but we'll forgive you. Thank you for that introduction. Before I begin, I want to thank the faculty of the Summer Institute for the honor of allowing me to speak with you today, and for those who recommended me for this lecture. Being a part of this institute over the past 5 years, first as a student and now as a professor, has been an incredibly enriching and rewarding experience. For those of you who don't know me, I want to start off by saying I have multiple sclerosis. MS is an autoimmune disease, which means that my immune system attacks my nervous system and destroys myelin, the insulating material that forms a sheath around neurons. As a demyelinating disease, MS affects the ability of nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord to communicate with each other effectively, creating lesions in the brain and spine. Or at least that's what I read in a medical textbook as a way to describe MS to laypersons. If that description is a bit hard to follow, then you're in good company. I spend a lot of time with doctors, as a patient, as a clinical ethicist, and as a professor in a medical school, and I often struggle to understand what they're talking about. MS means that sometimes my hands, feet, and legs go numb. Sometimes I have trouble seeing and thinking clearly. Often I am fatigued, and I am almost always medicated. But this is still a clinical description of my disease. This is the information my healthcare providers want to know, the ways in which my body fails me, and I have come to depend on medicine. But this is not the whole of my illness narrative. This is not how I have come to see and know myself, as a plethora of symptoms that amount to a diagnosis. So this morning, I want to share with you a bit more of my story, including how my adventures in medicine have been transformed by fine art. Now, there's something ironic in speaking for 45 minutes about art, particularly because I think art can be a wordless theology. But I'm here to give a lecture, and words are how I best communicate, so I will have to resort to using words. Using my words and some key images, I will describe to you why art can be a window into important human and divine truths. Art is perhaps uniquely suited to disclose embodied human experience, as well as divine mystery, which I believe are central to disability theology. As a Christian, I find liberating and creational potential in art that exalts ill and disabled bodies. Art, and in my case visual art, has helped me to see my body as part of God's own body. Art has helped me to flourish by calling me into a new way of being in the world, a new way of being ill, and a new way of becoming disabled. I believe the arts can help us all to make meaning for our lives and to help us participate in God's creative action in the world. This work is especially important for persons who are marginalized, including the ill and disabled, who are both underrepresented and misrepresented in culture. Our world is saturated with visual images in mass advertising and entertainment. Everywhere we turn, idealized bodies are being presented to us, showing us what it means to be beautiful and important. Fragile, wounded, and disabled bodies are rarely presented positively in our culture. But fine art allows us to break free of ableist symbols, metaphors, stories, and depictions of disability that denigrate our bodies. When I was first diagnosed with MS, the reigning images and stories I encountered online and in the media were almost universally negative. I had to search for richer and more complex stories and images of MS. And after I found them, I realized there was a need to add to them. I needed to tell my own story, both for myself and for others. So although my story is particular to me, I hope it encourages all of us to reimagine the liberating possibilities of disability art, or what I will call DisArt, as theology, as its own witness to God's love for creation and redeeming action in the world. This morning I want to highlight 4 ways in which DisArt can transform the way we experience illness and disability, understand our bodies, and open ourselves up to the transforming possibilities of God's grace. First, DisArt can help us creatively resist ableism propagated in modern medicine. Second, DisArt can help act as sacred iconography, celebrating and participating in divine poesis. Third, DisArt can open up space for communion and kinship. And finally, DisArt can challenge the cult of normalcy and point toward the eschatological transformation of all bodies. My illness has been significantly affected by visual representations of my body. If you're blind, visually impaired, or do better with words than images, I will do my best to describe the visual images that have come to shape my story. My story of chronic illness and disability began, as it often does, in a doctor's office. I was 23 years old and in my first year of divinity school at Vanderbilt. Weeks earlier, I had lost sensation in my feet, and it began to creep up my legs. I'd been told by an urgent care physician it was probably nothing, but that I should have an MRI and I should go and see a neurologist just in case. But upon meeting me for the first time, my neurologist walked into my exam room, brusquely, with no pleasantries, opened up my MRI scans on his computer. He had clearly never seen them before. And after clicking through them for about 30 seconds, he said, "It's MS." So here is the image that he saw. I'm going to describe it to you not as a medical professional, but as a layperson. The image on the screen is an MRI of my head facing profile left. The image is in grayscale. It begins at the top of my head and ends at my chin. In this image, you can see my brain, which stands out because it's a lighter gray than the rest of my face. It looks wrinkled with squiggly lines running throughout, probably because I'm very smart. At this time, nothing about this image was familiar to me. It could have been anyone's head, anyone's brain. It did not look like me. Moreover, it didn't look diseased to me. The physician, however, trained to interpret the MRI, immediately saw those bright white spots that shouldn't be there, which signaled missing nerve connections. This is how he knew I had MS. He was trained to see it represented in the MRI. But this was not knowledge that he was prepared to share. "Well, how can you be sure?" I asked. "Because I'm a specialist and I know what I'm looking for," he responded. In the MRI, my neurologist saw all that he needed to know. His voice was triumphant because he had solved the mystery of my diagnosis, and therefore the mystery of my body. For this physician, like so many physicians trained to see human bodies first as broken apart images in a textbook, and then as corpses, and only lastly as living human beings, the MRI became the way he saw me. I was not a person with a history embedded within relationships. I was an MS patient. I was this image. Here's another MRI of my brain. This image is taken from the top of my head so that you can see my eyes bulging from the top and my nose in between. Again, this image is in grayscale, and you can see some parts of my brain are lighter than others. For your convenience, I have circled in red a small light gray spot that shouldn't be there, lesion. My physician had a hard time looking me in the eye, but he was very comfortable with this image because he knew what to look for within the image, whereas my presence and my emotions were less easily interpreted or mastered. For my physician, the MRI became his idol, the singular way he saw me that prevented him from seeing me as a whole person. This one dimension of my body became my physician's singular and ultimate concern. We often think of idols as objects that are worshipped as if they were gods. But as the theologian Paul Tillich says, there are many things in our lives that can become idols when they concern us ultimately, when they consume our attention and distract us from God's purposes for and within creation. My physician created this idol through his medical gaze. This is the term philosopher Michel Foucault gave to describe the tendency of physicians to look at their patients as if they were objects rather than subjects. Treating me as an object of medical curiosity, he could use this image to explain something essential about me. It consumed his attention and prevented him from seeing the bigger picture, from seeing my humanity. For my physician, this MRI became the most important thing to know about me, because through this image, he could know my disease and attempt to control it. Made by and for physicians, the MRI pulls a person apart and puts her back together so that she can be known, read, and managed. My physician could master the MRI, and therefore he could manage me. He could not look me in the eye or acknowledge my tears, but he knew how to find an essential truth about me in that MR image. Or rather, he could foist his own propositional truth upon that image. The truth of my diagnosis, however, came at the expense of my humanity and subjectivity. In seeing me through my MRI, I became the object of my physician's gaze. As he gazed upon that MRI, I was made into medicine's creation, a body whose meaning was now subsumed into medicine's goals and values. I became used to being an object of medical inquiry, particularly when my student insurance stopped covering my treatment and I was forced to enter a clinical trial. My world became eye tests, memory tests, walking tests, dexterity tests, blood tests, nerve tests, pulmonary function tests, echocardiograms, and electrocardiograms. I began to see myself as host to a complex set of organs that could fail me at any moment. My body became present to me in a way it never had before. Dysfunctional and objectified by my healthcare providers, my body became an object to me as well. It became the thing that prevented me from accomplishing my goals, from being who I thought I wanted to be. All these new meanings for my body were symbolized in the MRI. These spots became my stigma. The roots of the word stigma come from the practice of branding or pricking the flesh. Marking the flesh of another, especially in the slave trade, helped to establish ownership over that person's body. Stigma has almost always been associated with shame and disgrace. These spots in the MRI marked me as diseased, and now part of the medical establishment. Of course, I could choose not to use medicine. I'm not forced. But if you want to access the goods of medicine, you must submit your body to medicine's regimes. You must give up full control of your body to a group of experts. You must acknowledge that your body is needy. But then a new image of my ill body was presented to me, this time not by a physician, but by my sister, Darian Goldenstahl. Several years after my diagnosis, she presented me with this silkscreen image. It is a nude woman frozen in ice. The image is blue and white. At first glance, it's a bit blurry and hard to make out. But if you concentrate, you can see a female figure at the center of the image. One arm on her head and the other on her hip. She's sitting on what appears to be a rock. She's stiff-looking, her face looking upward and her feet pointing toward one another. And there are several white spots floating around the image, representing the white spots on my MRI. This image is a tribute to my changing body. Darian titled it Numb. Rather than using a picture of me, Darian used a picture of herself to represent me. By substituting my flesh for her own, Darian became part of my story, a part of my body image. Rather than using an image to set me apart, to brand me as other or object, her image brings our bodies together. This image also represents my experience of illness. It's a whole body experience, sometimes cold and alienating, but sometimes radiant and mysterious. The convergence of our bodies in this print inspired another idea. Darian could use the MRIs I had amassed over the years and turn them into art. She could take these images, which were so uncomfortable to create, laying for hours at a time strapped down in a narrow scanner, and she could reimagine them. She could transform my stigma, my woundedness, into an opportunity for beauty and communion. In her art, I see Darian performing a theological and pastoral task, reconstituting my body and making it whole. In this image, there are two faces facing toward one another, which come together to make a third face in between. Like the first MRI, the faces are in profile. You can see my brain at the top, once again in light gray, this portion taken from my MRI. The faces below the brain are sharply focused because Darian created them by pressing her face into charcoal and leaving a negative impression. Darian's art helps to rescue my body from medicine's reductionism, that tendency in medicine to believe that things are easier to understand when you break them down into their simplest parts. Whereas my physicians tend to see me in just one way, Darian's art allows for multiplicity. Art pushes against the tendency to think we can control everything around us, including our own bodies. Unlike the medical image, this image resists being controlled by the viewer, the one who gazes upon it. It exceeds the viewer's grasp. It's excessive. One face becomes two, becomes three. It points towards my body's unfolding and becoming. Whereas my physicians strive for certainty and clarity when they look at my body in art testifies to the ambiguity of embodied life. I cannot predict when I will relapse, and I don't know how my body will function in the future. Being finite means we live in ambiguity. Our bodies are in some ways mysterious, even to us. Art testifies to this ambiguity and mystery. It resists singular interpretations, instrumentalization, and reductionism. As a creative act, art is analogically connected to God's creation of the world. Art creation is a praxis that forces us to confront the reigning images of disability and illness that saturate our culture. God's creative activity is in some ways inaccessible to us. Unlike God, we do not create from nothing, but from the givenness of what is. But in our own acts of creation, we rage against what is, transforming it rather than merely attempting to replicate it. As Shane described yesterday, there's a place for rage against our systems of injustice in our theology and in our acts of creation. And there come the two possibilities in art: to deepen our connection to the Creator by participating in our own acts of creation, but also raging against the brokenness of our world. In this way, art is subversive. It challenges what we think of as given or natural. Whereas ableist culture sees ill and disabled bodies as shameful, pitiable, or disgraced, DisArt is capable of transforming bodies into something new, perhaps even making them holy. Just as Christ's wounds were transformed into sacred scars that showed his disciples his humanity and divinity after the resurrection, so too does DisArt seek to transform what was previously seen as dysfunction or disgrace into a more sacred form. In Darian's art, my ill body becomes an icon, a doorway into the truth of my body, which was, of course, created in the image and likeness of God's own body. In the icon, God's own being is being communicated through this very particular, fragile body. In this image, you see the standard markings of an MRI in the corners of the image. On the right-hand side, there's a scale, which is used to identify proportion in the MRI. In the middle of the image is a face. Again, you can see my brain as represented in the MRI near the top, and a face that looks as though it's being split down the middle. The face almost looks pressed up against the print, staring straight at you. Surrounding the face is a white glow emanating from the top of my head. This image is at once both monstrous and haloed, frail yet powerful. At first, I found this image disturbing. It's a somewhat grotesque version of my body. But icons rarely reveal beautiful bodies. They often portray gaunt, tired, suffering bodies. The more I look at this image, the more I have come to associate it with those sainted bodies, a bit grotesque and yet holy. Some have commented that it looks a bit like the Shroud of Turin, that piece of linen cloth which supposedly bears the negative image of Jesus from his burial shroud after the crucifixion, the first icon of Jesus. Whereas the MRI alone is meant to be understood and mastered, this image too is difficult to master. And this is not because Darian intends it to be mysterious. Icons, after all, are not created by artists. Rather, the image itself gazes back at you, invites you to see and participate in something beyond it. It is visually communicating its depth to you. The image, if indeed it is an icon, invites you to look beyond the visible, to find the essence, reality, and salvific properties within the body it represents. This is the body that Christ inhabited and the Spirit dwells within, the ill, vulnerable body. God's immanence shines forth in the image. The God who chooses to dwell with us, chose to become vulnerable to save us, and chooses to be for us, not in spite of our infirmities, but along with them. This, not the power, strength, and superior rationality, is what it means to be human. As Jean Vanier says, to discover who I am is to discover that I am fragile, and I am loved just as I am, and that I am beautiful. This is the necessary rearticulation of humanness for an ableist culture that is fearful of the monstrous, disabled, and diseased. DisArt celebrates disabled bodies as wonderfully and fearfully created by God, and in so doing, praises the Creator. In Darian's art, I am transformed, simultaneously more human and more inhabited by God. The image invites you too to be transformed, to see yourself as a holy temple, and to see otherness, even otherness within yourself, as a site of divinity. The icon cannot be mastered or exhausted. Just as God makes room for otherness within God's self, the icon makes room for you and invites you in. In this space, you are called into something new. With Isaiah, it says, "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland." DisArt also opens up new spaces for community and kinship. First, there are the bonds of kinship and caretaking that happen between the artist and her subject. Darian, of course, was already my sister before I became her muse, but art has become the way she takes care of me. We live far apart, but I know that nearly every day, my body is on her mind as she lovingly and carefully sits with my image, reads my narratives, and transforms my medical images into art. By merging her flesh with my flesh, by inhabiting the space of my body, Darian is helping co-create my image with me, and in so doing, we're both transformed. Ours is not a perfect cohabitation. My MS and my experiences are my own, but her art is a practice of caretaking that unites us. Her art is not merely signifying our kinship, it is doing the work of binding us together, as well as binding up my wounds. This takes work on my part as well, because I must be willing to give up ownership of my image to another. I must be willing to be vulnerable. I must once again submit my body to another person who wishes to tell my story and to create representations of me. Unlike my physician, however, Darian's construction of my image actively involves me. It requires my story and my image. In her artistic process, I begin to see my vulnerability and frailty as a gift, a dark gift of the flesh. Some may think that this art would be more powerful if I created it myself, if I had total ownership over my body and my image. And there are many wonderful artists representing the beauty and holiness of their own bodies through DisArt. And their art is no less powerful because they have created it themselves. But giving over parts of myself has strengthened my relationship with my sister. And it has taught me the power of vulnerability in submission. Particularly in feminist theology, submission is a fraught term. Women have been told for centuries to submit themselves and their bodies to other authorities. But allowing your vulnerability to be seen by another, particularly another who loves you and wishes to make room for you, that can be liberating submission. Because at the end of the day, my desire is to be seen, known, and loved. Allowing myself to be vulnerable before Darian allows her to begin to feel that desire within me. And I recognize that my desire to be known and loved is already connected to my desire for God. Acknowledging my need to be seen in this way makes room for God to fill those spaces in my heart. As the feminist theologian Sarah Coakley says, in grasping for God, I realize that I am already being grasped by God. Submitting my vulnerability before Darian gives way to my desire for God, which reveals God's unchanging and infinite love for me. In giving myself to another, my body is no longer for me alone. It's also for others. By exhibiting her art, Darian invites others into this communion. Two bodies come together in the art, and others act as a witness to our love and co-creative act. Darian, myself, and the exhibition goers are caught up in a Trinitarian-like moment. You are invited to behold a new body, one which is multiple and making room for you. And whether she intends it or not, Darian's art transforms the gallery into a liturgical space, where others are invited to share in the process of cohabitation and co-creation that we have begun. There's no guarantee that anyone else will experience the profundity of that exchange, but there's a chance for revelation in the gallery, a communication of God's own life represented through the transformation of this very particular fragile body. This picture is from one of Darian's exhibitions. There are 3 prints displayed. Each is 8 feet tall and 3.5 feet across. Each contains an image of a body that is life-sized. Darian created them by again pressing her flesh into charcoal to reveal a negative image, and then layered in my MRIs. In all the images, the body is represented as on the precipice. On the left, I'm taking a first step up a flight of stairs. On the second, I'm standing in a doorway, about to cross the threshold. In the final image, I'm at the bottom of a set of stairs looking up. In all these images, the body is faint and slightly ghostly, pulled apart, a bit monstrous. I rarely display this monstrous quality on my body's surface. Rather, I carry it with me as a constant reminder of what it is like to feel different, to feel set apart as a result of my body. Monstrosity sets one apart. It makes a person feel alien and aberrant. In the medieval world, monsters were seen as liminal, human but also not quite human. Seeing oneself as monstrous is to see oneself as separate from the rest of humanity, belonging and yet not quite belonging to the human race. These pieces represent this feeling of being set apart through monstrosity, and there's solitude here. By placing her body into my own, however, Darian takes this journey with me. We stand together at the threshold. The images also invite you to take the next step into a future unknown. They invite you to see yourself in this body, this temple of the Holy Spirit, to see the humanity of the other, to see yourself as part of the body, and to unite yourself to that body is to understand God dwelling among us. Just as God makes room for us within God's self, so too are we called to make room for one another. This new communion signals the renewal of all things promised by Christ. And I'll most basic level, invites you to see reality differently. It activates the imagination, reflecting and at times challenging the spirit of our culture. Art is capable of making us more sensitive to diverse realms of reality, including the spiritual dimensions of our existence. Good art, as the practical theologian Robin Jensen argues, challenges us how we view the world and offers us channels of retransformation by evoking our imaginations and causing us to stop and wonder. DisArt seizes on our culture's obsession with bodily perfection and challenges it by exalting, beautifying, complexifying, and sacralizing bodies that are often seen as weak, defective, and undesirable. DisArt prophetically challenges our culture's cult of normalcy, which, as Tom Reynolds describes, are the systems and practices in modern liberal society which value freedom, equality, independence, rationality, productivity, efficiency, and prosperity as essential for normal human life and flourishing. DisArt participates in the transformation of our world and the moral order by reordering the things of this world to disclose something new about God and ourselves. God is transforming our pain and grief, the things that should not be, into the things God intends them to be. But God's transformation is not the fix or cure offered by modern medicine. Whereas medicine often aims at halting or slowing down the effects of finitude, God is merging finitude with infinity, the finite body with God's infinite body. God's transformation of the body is the exaltation and glorification of our humanness, our bodies as they were intended to be. This image, and maybe now we'll play the sound. Dwelling space Devan has created. It's shaped like a small house with a triangular roof at the top and 6 sides. The structure is 5.5 feet high, 5.5 feet across, and 5 feet deep. The material of the tent is waxed silk. It's speckled with a small blue and black floral pattern found on a hospital gown. In this image, Devan is sitting inside of the structure, looking down at a sign which reads MRI in use. The sign is black and the words are red. The sign is being illuminated by a red bulb, which gives the inside of the structure a red hue. And that sound you heard playing is a recording of an MRI machine, but slowed down to resemble breath. In this piece, Devan turns the body inside out. The medical machinery is happening inside the dwelling space, which is a hospital gown normally inhabited by the body. You are invited to dwell within the hospital gown, to experience the process of the MRI machine, which, like this dwelling space, is too small, too loud, and too bright. By inhabiting this space, however, you are entering a new body, a body subjected to medicine, but waiting to be transformed by your presence. The patient is no longer alone. According to Elaine Scarry, words cannot fully articulate the experience of pain, but when pain is dispersed, when it is shared, it can diminish the pain of the individual. In this piece, you are invited to share my burden, which is sometimes physical and almost always social, and by sharing it, lessen it for me. Your presence transforms my experience. This cohabitation of the body is a gesture toward a time when our communal life will be more radically transformed, when we will dwell together in a perfect harmony without pain. This co-dwelling is an invitation into a new reality. By revisioning the disabled body, by turning it inside out, by inviting you into the body, DisArt prophetically challenges our cultural associations of disability. You can choose to walk away. Some people see Devan's art for the first time and are so overwhelmed they leave the gallery space. Fear of the ill and disabled body is potent in our culture, and many people's experience with medicine makes them unable to see medicine's ability to transform the medicalized body. Darian's art challenges the idolatries of medicine and the injustices that can occur when we reduce persons to their bodily defects. In DisArt, we are invited to imagine disability as a gift rather than a loss, a possibility rather than a limitation, an instance of wonder rather than repugnance, and a source of power rather than docility. In DisArt, we come to see the world become more fully what it is meant to be, becoming more fully itself, pointing us toward the gap between what is and what could be. We foreshadow the kingdom of God in which our relationships to our bodies, our neighbors, and God will be set right. This is the good word that needs to be told to our culture, but also to our churches. Depending on the kind of church you go to, art may or may not be presented to you in your places of worship. I grew up in a Reformed church that resisted beautification of any kind inside the church. Perhaps you go to a similar kind of church. But I think that's a mistake. Art can call us into new ways of thinking and being. It can call the church to account for the ways it has refused to see the beauty and divinity in some people. When I speak back to Darian's art through my theological reflections, I invite Darian to see her art as more transformative, more sacred than she originally intended. At the same time, while not explicitly religious, Darian's art, and art like it, can challenge the church to reconsider its settled beliefs about illness and disability, to reimagine communion and the becoming of the body. Particularly for those churches who have granted mere salvific properties to medicine, DisArt complicates the vision of the goods of medicine in our modern world. Medicine can help relieve suffering, prevent premature death, and stave off the symptoms of our finitude. But it rarely helps us to love our bodies and accept our fragility. DisArt has the capacity to challenge our churches to focus on what they need to see, and can challenge us to accept that we are accepted. Darian's art is not accessible to everyone, as some of you here are very likely aware. Though some of her work incorporates sound and smell, much of it is visual, partly in response to my own illness as represented visually to me. Thankfully, Darian's is not the only DisArt out there. Accessible art, which can be felt, heard, and smelled, is becoming more popular, though sadly lags far behind its necessity. A colleague of mine at Michigan State worked with art students to create accessible pieces of art which were displayed for a single day at our campus art museum. Hundreds of people showed up. It turns out lots of people want the opportunity to touch, hear, and smell art. Although this event was hosted by an organization that works with people with visual impairments, it was a community event. Here, young and old, abled and disabled, artists and art novices came together to experience something new. I imagine this is a bit of what the kingdom of God is like. Perhaps it is a place of persistent creativity, a place where we continually discover and renew our connectedness to one another through perpetual recreation. As an educator, I know firsthand the power of art in the most unlikely of places. In the spring, I had the opportunity to teach medical students the benefits of art for their practice as future physicians. Now, here is a group that couldn't be more disconnected and skeptical of fine art. But after trips to the art museum, sketching classes with artists, and bookmaking, something clicked. They understood that beholding art can help focus our attention, help us to slow down and really notice what's in front of us. Art can illuminate the body in new ways. It can invite multiplicity where there was once only reduction. And art can be a way to express experiences of illness, disability, and death that are unutterable. Here you see 4 images from a piece of art one of my students made in my class. It's a tribute to her grandfather who recently died of a heart condition. This is an artist's book that she made. The top left-hand corner is the first page. It's an image of an anatomical heart in red. It has a piece of perforated paper over the top. Physicians did not know the cause of her grandfather's heart failure. there are 2 pages. On the left, there's the word broken, spelled out in black watercolor. On the right-hand page is an image of her grandfather when he entered the Navy. He's in a sailor's uniform. The image has been cut up into 1-inch strips and pasted back on the page. There's a thick red substance covering this image. The image on the bottom left is another page. The one on the left side, there's the word wounds, and on the right, another image of a heart, this time made in rose petals. There are pieces of sheer gauze covering parts of the heart. On the bottom right hand of the final page is blue and reads, "Take hope," in cursive at the top. Below is a green envelope, which contains rose bush seeds she was given at her grandfather's memorial. Each page of this book takes you through a disease process and its effects on the body. But also covering the pages is molasses, because my student's grandfather taught her how to bake, and she baked the book in her oven. On all the left-hand pages, she spells out, "He heals the brokenhearted and binds their wounds," her grandfather's favorite Bible passage. My student, by her own declaration, worshipped her grandfather, and she struggled with how to process his death and how to express her emotions following his passing. She said the process of making this book was therapeutic. It allowed her to express emotions in a way she never could before. And then she presented this book as a gift to her grandmother, a small token of her love. Art does not make bad experiences good. It does not bring the dead back to life, but it can make life more bearable. It can bind up wounds and heal the brokenhearted. If art is indeed theology, then perhaps we should all be reading it, making it, and celebrating it. Accessible art assumes that many different kinds of people with varying types of abilities can benefit from engaging art. You don't need to be a master artist. The act of creation can be fulfilling, and it can express something deep about ourselves and about our experiences in ways that words often cannot. Creating art is about telling stories, but it can also be about creating stories. Through art, we are shaping the world around us and reshaping ourselves. For those of us who spend most of our time in academia, through art we can hold an object, create something with our hands, and reconnect with the stuff around us. For those of you who might spend your days caretaking, you can create or co-create art which illuminates those unutterable or wordless bonds that you have formed with others. If you work in an organization, through art you can slow down, appreciate the beauty around you, and represent the meaning of your work through a form that best represents it. If you're clergy, you can beautify the spaces of your worship with art, and better yet, invite your congregants to create art with you. If you're a person with a disability or a chronic illness, you can create or co-create art that represents your body and your experiences. Our culture desperately needs more first-person narratives about disability and chronic illness. Challenge our common assumptions about your body, your mind, and your life. Our communities need to hear and see the stories of illness and disability so we can better know and appreciate one another. Whoever you are, whatever you do, art can have a place in your life. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a lot to take in. Questions and comments, please.
I cannot tell you how meaningful this presentation is to me. In my early 40s, I was diagnosed with 2 aneurysms. So I had the MRI scans every 6 months for years, and eventually 4 angiograms and a brain surgical procedure. As a result, at some point, when I was taken to the emergency room, I had a TIA, they think. And I lost my ability to use written language. I'm an English professor. I have a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. I was awarded the Randall Jarrell Fellowship, and I couldn't write a sentence. In fact, it took me 3 hours to write a simple email. My colleagues didn't know. My students didn't know. I was scrambling to use all kinds of voice activation. And I remember doing this. It was troubling to me that every time you saw these scans, you couldn't see that. You couldn't see she can't use language. So I would take the scans and I would take the broken sentences from my emails and I would put them on top of each other. So I understand what you're saying about the scans show so much, but they don't show the whole picture. They don't show even the whole picture of what you're experiencing in that illness. And there's something very healing about being able to transform those. You know, eventually, fortunately, I got a lot of my abilities back, and what I don't have, I can easily compensate for. But it was a very terrifying year because I felt that using language, I know a lot of you are academics here, and to suddenly not be able to use written language really cut to the core of me, and that was something that wasn't represented in these images that I would go to doctors and look at over and over again. So thank you so much for this.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Who's going to be next? Michael.
My name is Kathleen James Cabin. I'm from Canada, and I'm on the board of a care home called Sherbrooke Community Center. And in this care home, we have an art program where the residents create art, and it's not art therapy, it's art that is expressive of their experiences. The art, the organizer of this program, an artist himself, invented a way for people using wheelchairs to paint using their wheelchairs. So fashioned a long stick at the end of which was the brush, and they made enormous canvases that were displayed. So we find at this care facility, home it is, a place for people to live, that art is part of life and it's part of expressing who they are. It's made a huge difference to the life of the people living there and the people who work there, for whom it's home as well. So I just wanted to share that as an example of art as expression.
Thank you. And I think that differentiation between art as therapeutic and art as sort of a displaying of an experience is important. I mean, art can be therapeutic, but I think it's more than that. I think this is more than, it's not just therapy for me. I think it's, I dare say, like an ontological transformation. I become something new with these new representations of my body.
Michael.
Thank you, Devan. Oh, very loud. Thank you, Devan. That was like almost inexpressibly powerful, and I'm a verbal processor too, so that means something. It's obvious that your students make art from their own experiences. How do you share your experience with your students? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think that's always really tricky when you're an educator because you don't want to cloud their experience with your own. You don't want to sort of say, you know, this is me, and it's very vulnerable, and then that's all they want to focus on. So I did that sort of subtly this year by showing them Darian also makes artist books, which you can hold and flip through, and they're wonderfully powerful, and you can't quite capture them with images because they need to be held and flipped through. And when they realized it was about me, they had all sorts of questions. But this was at the end of the course, once they were already doing their own thing. So it came sort of at that point to sort of share that part of myself. But I think that's really tricky because you never know how they're going to take that and how they're going to think about you. So I think the more we get to know each other and the more they come to trust me, the more they come to appreciate my narrative. So I try to backload that into the experience.
Thank you. when I said, as appreciation of your lecture, that was a lot to take in, I actually meant it was almost inexpressibly powerful. So thank you, Michael. Who's next? Kathy?
I'm not going to ask you about my power. Thanks. So we talked a little bit this week about consent. And so I'm wondering what that process was between you and your sister in negotiating what she should and should not be using from your images.
Yeah, that's a great question. Like I said, when she gave me that first image, there was no consent involved. She just wanted to make art about me. And if she had met anybody else, that might have felt weird. But she's my sister, and it was meant as a tribute, and I took it that way. She lives in Canada, and I thought it was very funny that her ethical review board did not require my consent for her research project because I was a family member. Yeah, and I'm a clinical ethicist, and I work in a hospital, and consent is so big. And I know that family members cannot just consent on your behalf. That that is actually really dangerous, especially to people with disabilities. That we give over that power to another person too quickly. I would say, and so the consent piece is important. I physically mail her my MRI scans on a CD-ROM. I allow her this permission to use them. And I don't dictate what the art will be. So I write narratives and I send them to her. So I share these experiences. She has the images, but I have to give her permission to be free with her artistic act. And that is very vulnerable. And there are times when she creates art that I don't get at first. And I look at, like, the one with the shroud. I mean, I saw that and I was like, oh, that's terrifying. And it was sort of a recall of when we first were looking at the MRIs together. There were a few where I was like, oh, they're really scary. The ones where your eyes are kind of bulging and they're like a little monstrous looking. And I think she was actually trying to capture that. So it takes time, and sometimes I have to sit with her art to really appreciate it. Just like I had to sit with the MRIs to appreciate them. And I can't let it be filtered through her words. Just like I can't let my physician be the only one to interpret those MRIs for me. When he or she does, I only see what he or she sees. But when I bring them home and look at them myself, like, your body is wondrous, and that is actually captured wonderfully in the MRIs, because you get like 300 of them. And they only focus on a few, a specific part of my brain and spine. But looking through them is lovely. So I have to give permission for Derry to do what she does, but I have to allow her freedom, because it can't be transformative to me unless I give her that. So I have to sort of submit myself to her and receive her gift. And that takes a lot of vulnerability.
Can I raise a question myself? I might fumble this a little bit. I think it's a bit, the elements in your presentation that were kind of moving beyond words. So that means being indeed personal words, unknown territory in a sense. So it struck me the way that you started. You said, I'm a woman of words, so this is how I approach these things. I took that to be a reference to your identity as a professor, so which way I can identify. But then during the images you showed, there was a different kind of language coming in. It started with the first image where you said, she becomes disabled. You used the notion, her flesh merging with my flesh. Then later on, I heard words like co-dwelling, cohabitation. And I started to think about the limits of doing theology and disability. I was thinking about what I have taken Jean Vanier to be doing. I need to frame this very quickly. We were discussing during this week at some point problems of representation and misrepresentation, and one of the examples came up, the extent to which Vanier is misrepresenting people with disabilities by using terms as weakness. And I think my response would be, I'm not sure that Jean is about representing disability. It seems to me that he is more about our own misrepresentations as non-disabled people. But certainly, listening to the terms of code value, the best that can imply is, contrary to all appearances, I am like you. But that's not nearly close to the transfer of disability that you are suggesting that DisArt can do. So could you reflect a little bit on what you, having told us and shared the things with you, consider as the limits of doing theology and disability?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it'll be hard to answer in words.
Yeah.
But I do think it is this theological performance that is so hard to, I wrote a book, right? So there's a lot of words in that book. And so that you have to sort of, for many audiences, do it that way. But the gallery space is so different than that. When I go to her exhibitions, it's also a little weird because it's like 20 images of me, like surrounding me. But we don't tell anybody. So I walk around and listen to people, sort of trying to enter that space of my body without telling them who I am. And it's very profound. And the things that people take away are things I would have never imagined. They're not things that I would have been able to communicate. Sort of what people say is meaningful about that art, without being presented with my 45-minute lecture ahead of time, is really powerful. I don't think that we could have done justice to it through narrating back and forth, through a written story and a written story. I just think there's something about entering that body in that visual way, particularly because of the particularity of my illness narrative. It's a lovely merger of that body, which I think other people experience in caretaking, but might not represent it in that particular way. And I think if they could, if they were open to that, that might be sort of even draw people closer together. Because we're very close, right? We share blood. Like nobody has a more similar genetic line to me than my own sister. But there's something about, we're literally smashing our bodies together. There's no more difference. And that is just really lovely. Because I feel difference all the time. To feel the uniting, kind of overcoming that difference is very powerful. And I think it transforms her. I think she also sees herself as a different person by bringing our bodies together. And she's not trying to colonize me and take on my experience as her own. I think she's very careful about that. But she is trying to inhabit my space as an act of caretaking, which I really appreciate in what she does.
Back here around.
Hi, Devan. I think I was shocked by your use of the word monstrous and monstrosity. Like, that seems really harsh to me. So I guess I just want to ask you why you use that term, or what that means to you.
Yeah, it's in part I teach a lot of classes on the freak show, and I think that narrating that history of teratology and monstrosity is very profound. And I think it does, so thank you for that question, because I think it does come across as harsh. But I think it's also very fascinating, this idea of liminality, the idea that some people's bodies just make them separate. So we don't use the word monster anymore, but I think we still mean it sometimes. But there's still books of teratology. There's still this idea that some embodiments are just alienating, and they can't conform to what nature intends even. This was kind of the idea of teratology, and it's theology. Either this is God's punishment, or this is God displaying God's wonderful nature through a very particular body. It does both those things. It can set you apart either as God's wondrous creation or God's representation of a sinful world. And I think that that still carries weight in our traditions, whether we name it as monstrosity or not. I just want to kind of call that out, as I think there might be a renewal of a monster theology that needs to happen. And I'm not necessarily the person to do that work, but I think that there's sort of knowing that history and tracing it to our contemporary situation can be very helpful in understanding some of our cultural representations of disability that I think we should be doing more work with. Thank you.
To follow up on this question a bit ago, one of the things that strikes me with your question, Hans, and what your response is, in the sense you were saying, in theology, we've got a set of words and a language we use. In medicine, there's a set of words, and human services and human science is a set of words and language we use. But both of those sets of languages are limited in the ways that art and music and story and other kinds of languages, symbol, are not. And which is how it could possibly speak, I think, to help draw those two worlds together. And I could think about cohabitation and your feeling not so alone. Just, I don't know if you've maybe you've already thought about this, but I couldn't help but think about the early part of Genesis when Adam was alone and somebody took a rib and formed another person. Not an MRI, but formed another person, and in that there was that relationship and the co-dwelling, so to speak.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking that. So that was on my mind. And I think I was thinking, it's a sisterly bond and not like sort of maybe the traditional man and woman in that story bond. And so it's hard to sort of parallel them exactly. But there's something very, the giving of the body to create something new is very much a Genesis-like act. It is not good that we are alone. And we are sort of analogically connected to God's doing of the creating of the second person. I think we're also representing that. It's that. And Adam and Eve didn't cohabitate in the same way. They were actually two separate people, but coming together, and we use that sort of language in marriage, right? And so that there's like this kind of odd erotic language that creeps up in there too, which is weird because she's my sister and I want to be careful about how we talk about that. But there is something very desirous and flesh of my flesh and two bodies coming together that is also happening there.
I purposely didn't use the word man.
Yeah, I know.
No, I was thinking about, I didn't mention it, but I was thinking about the connection with Julia's presentation just about the transfer of disability, which was very much part of how she described the dance between the two persons. And so, what I meant with referencing Vanier was, I am like you is a form of equation, but it's not a transfer of a sharing in the way that you were talking about. Yeah.
I just have two very quick points. Number one, I wonder, have you ever explored with the doctor who gave you that first diagnosis after just looking at the scan? And have you ever shared with them the art that has come out of this so that perhaps they can have another way of seeing the same image, but sort of as a key into the mystery? That's what icons do in some sense in our religious experience. They offer us a way of seeing into the mystery. Just as the MRI allows the physician to see what is going on inside the body. But I'm just curious, have they ever expressed to you, or have you ever tried to share with them seeing things differently in that way? And the other question would be, in relation to what you were talking about with gerontology, it reminded me of the work that was first publicized, 20 years or so ago now, with the Broadway play, The Elephant Man. There is much there that talks to me about what is a monster. And what is reality as far as our outward expression versus what is really on the inside of the person, the commonalities that we make.
It's a great question. So I did mail my original neurologist my book. I haven't heard anything. And this has been over a decade ago, so I'm not sure that he remembers me, and I'm not sure that he would remember that sort of interactions that we had early on. I've had several neurologists since then. I think my goal is I've been displaying some of Darian's art in our radiology buildings as a way to just sort of awaken some of that. And I think the more we try to get it into clinical spaces, that's sort of the next step. And there's also something full circle about making my students do art, my future physicians do art, that I think is I don't know that I even in my own mind connected that until after we had done it, and I said, oh, this is full circle of my story, that hopefully I'm training physicians themselves to see differently by participating in art. So I think that there's more work to be done there to introduce this into clinical and medical spaces. And yes, I think that this idea of monstrosity, who really is the monster? It's also the anniversary of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein too, right? So that theme kind of comes up there too. There's a lot of work to be done there.
Last question is for Benjamin.
To go back to the consent question. So at the beginning of your talk, you said that you were forced into this clinical trial. Having read your book, I know that you're distilling that portion. And you're talking more systemically as if you really didn't have a choice other than that. But I'm assuming the reality is you still gave some consent into that clinical trial. And you're retrospectively kind of critiquing the whole systemic nature of that in light of that. What are you doing as an assistant professor of clinical ethics for future physicians when it comes to this? I'm assuming, are you helping them understand that consent is not an end-all, be-all?
Yes.
If you can talk to that.
Yeah. That's a great question. So in my field of bioethics, we use this four-principle approach, which I very much don't like because it forces everything into certain kinds of ideas. But autonomy is always paramount. I think a lot of my work is trying to say autonomy might be necessary, but it's never sufficient for an ethical encounter. The signing of the piece of paper, I had serious misconceptions about my clinical trial that I only realized in retrospect when I started studying what it means to do human subjects research. So I think pushing against the idea that autonomy, and this intersects so well with disability studies too, it's not all about independent self-determination and autonomy. These cannot be our reigning moral principles, because some people cannot give it, and some people are assumed to be giving it without any more conversation about what that looks like. So I think constantly pushing against the medical system's valorization of autonomy being the most important thing that we can get from our patients, of their consent, their informed consent to this, it's, as a signature on a piece of paper, is never good enough. So I want to push against that in a lot of work that I do.